Hello, everyone, and welcome to, I think this is the 10th of these Monday night chats. So congratulations for surviving now 10 of these. I have to say, I'm feeling a bit more optimistic today than I have for a long time. It's good to hear the news from the government today that they are recognizing that the arts need financial help. Whether it'll be enough, who knows, but at least it's something. And it's good that at least it's now entered the news agenda. And I think it's being accepted for what it is, a gesture of goodwill on the part of the government, and a recognition that there is importance to our artistic and cultural life. So that's great. Hopefully it means that at least some of the venues will still be there when we are able to return to performing. I'm sure not all of them will be, but hopefully some will be. So that's good news. And of course, cricket starts this week, Test cricket on Wednesday. Can't wait for that. So that's very exciting. I'm very happy about that. Also, I have to say, in my life, I'm seeing my students now on a relatively normal conditions, face to face in the same room. That's great. My daughter is now in a live ballet studio during the week, so that's also good news. So things are definitely improving and opening up, and hopefully it won't be too long before we're able to sing and meet up together. As you know, today I'm going to talk about Poulenc and in particular his wonderful Gloria. Now, Poulenc is a composer who is often, I think, slightly misunderstood. It's quite a complicated life, and he had quite a checkered life in many respects. Born in 1899, so he lived through both World Wars, and in fact served in both World Wars. Firstly in infantry, I think it was, in the First World War, and in the Second World War he was an anti-aircraft gunner for a while before France surrendered. So he definitely knew about conflict, and all of that ensued. He was also in an unusual position, I think, partly because at that time, the early part of the 20th century, French music was primarily about not being German. In other words, they were desperately trying to find their own identity and their own characteristics and their own musical style, reacting to and at the same time absorbing Wagner. So the fact that there was a little bit of conflict between Germany and Germanic music and French music, and of course what was going on politically and in terms of the wars and all the rest of it, is not surprising. There was a huge element of anti-Germanic sentiment in a lot of Poulenc's life, or throughout a lot of Poulenc's life. And the other thing that set him out from others was the fact that he didn't have a conventional musical education. He didn't go to the big Paris conservatoires. He was essentially self-taught. And the reason for that is quite simple. He in some ways was greatly beneficial of the fact that he was born to very rich parents, or rich parents, comparatively rich parents. And his father was a businessman, owned a business which he expected Francis Poulenc to take over in due course. And of course, that wasn't going to happen. But nevertheless, his parents both died while he was a teenager. I think his mother died when he was 16 and his father 2 years later when he was 18. So that must have been pretty shocking for him. But it did mean that he inherited quite a large amount of money. We enabled him to buy a very nice house in the country outside Paris. And for many years, he was comparatively comfortably off, although later on, after the Second World War, he'd lost a lot of money, or he'd spent it, and found himself in a position of being comparatively poor and having to work hard to earn money. So the fact that he was self-taught is significant. He wasn't part of the mainstream of music society. And his two parents also left him with very opposite kind of personalities. His father was a very strict Catholic, comparatively somber, as I understand it, whilst his mother was exuberant, artistic, party-loving, a very successful pianist in her own right. And these two aspects of his personality rather overshadowed everything that he did. The rather serious, somber, very religious man on the one side, and the much more frivolous, party-going man of society, if you like, on the other. So, being self-taught, he was in need of teachers at some point in his life, and he became, through studying with various eminent pianists of the time, he became a very, very, very fine pianist. And he also had affinity with other members of Les Six, which I'm sure you've heard of, Honegger, Milhaud, Auric, and the others. And so there was an element of coming together as part of a group of composers, even though it was a little bit artificial, because this group of composers was kind of set up from outside. It wasn't them coming together. But one person in particular did have a profound influence on him, and that was Erik Satie of Gymnopédie fame. He was a great admirer of Satie, and Satie acted as almost a father figure for him. He wasn't quite so keen on Ravel. I think he had a lot of respect for Ravel, particularly his orchestration, but there were elements of Ravel's music which Poulenc found hard to appreciate, let's say. Instead, Poulenc was much more interested in Stravinsky, and indeed Schubert as well was another favorite composer of his. But Stravinsky in particular, and if you think of the big ballets that Stravinsky wrote for Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe when they came to Paris, these were massive influence on Poulenc. So it's not surprising that he wrote a lot of music for that genre. The other thing about Poulenc that is worth saying, that I spoke about the kind of antiphony between Germany and France, and French music and German music. And this certainly applied to the Second Viennese School. A lot of the French composers of that time really struggled with Schoenberg, Berg, and Webern. They understood what they were trying to do, and I think they had respect for it, but they didn't really see it going anywhere. And in a sense, they were proved right. I know some people really enjoy the music of the Second Viennese School, but a lot of people don't. And I think it's significant that later composers like Messiaen, French composer that is, Messiaen and Pierre Boulez, they rather took a dim view of Poulenc because they felt he was a little bit staid, a little bit too conventional for their taste. He didn't absorb the teachings, if you like, of Schoenberg's school. So even in his later life, he didn't quite get the recognition perhaps he deserved from his French colleagues. One thing that did occur in Poulenc's life, however, was a fondness for coming to England, and in particular, a friendship with Benjamin Britten. And interestingly, Poulenc had a duo with a singer, in this case, the baritone Pierre Bernard, and they had a lot of very successful concert tours in England and indeed in other parts of the world, a bit like the Britten-Pears partnership, but it was very much a musical partnership, nothing more in Poulenc's case. And he did a lot of work, did a lot of concerts for the BBC after the war from 1945 onwards. And that kind of friendship was really quite strong between Britten and Poulenc. They performed together at the Albert Hall and that kind of thing. But there was also a slightly darker side to Poulenc's life. And there were two major confusions, one of which was his sexuality. He was never terribly sure about his sexuality. He had a lot of affairs with men, including a chauffeur, and another of his lovers was a traveling salesman. But he also had a brief affair with a woman, and they had a daughter, and she actually inherited the estate when he died. So there was this sort of constant battle, constant conflict going on in his head. And also the same applied to religion. There were moments in his life when he was intensely religious, and other moments when he found it really very troublesome. And all of this rather led to a difficult period in the 1950s, when he actually suffered quite a major nervous breakdown and was institutionalized for a while. Mostly depression, but also I think a lot of the conflicts and confusions of his life contributed to that illness, which was obviously very sad for him. But the good news, and where we are now, is that in 1961, he was, or before that, in fact, he was in 1959, he was commissioned by the Koussevitzky Foundation in America to create a piece for soprano, chorus, and orchestra for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And that is the piece that we're considering today, the wonderful Gloria. So it's a comparatively late work. Although he started it in 1959, finished in 1960, it was first performed in Boston, in America, in 1961. And he died in 1963. And it's interesting to note that at his funeral, he was adamant that he didn't want any of his own music to be performed. Instead, Marcel Dupré, the wonderful French organist and composer, played the music of J.S. Bach and nothing else at his funeral in 1963. And Poulenc himself said, I have at least managed to write 3 good religious works. I'm hoping that they spare me a few days in purgatory if I narrowly avoid going to hell. So that just gives an insight as to just how troubled his mind was, particularly on religious matters. And it's interesting to note that when the Gloria first came out, it was accused of being really quite a sacrilegious piece. Many critics were pretty astonished by it. They felt it was just not reverent enough to be considered a serious religious work. Poulenc answered the criticism by saying, while writing, I had in mind those Crozzelli frescoes with angels sticking their tongues out, and also some solemn-looking Benedictine monks that I saw playing football one day. And there's all the time this incredible mixture of solemnity with mischievous exuberance. And I think that's the best way to approach the Gloria. Sometimes there are moments of wonderful, captivating solemnity, and at other times there is this kind of mischievous, almost frivolous exuberance. Great joy, but also great sincerity as well. And from a musical perspective, one of the things that is immediately obvious about this piece is that it has very little counterpoint. We've talked in previous weeks about the relationship of counterpoint to much of the music that we sing. There's comparatively little counterpoint in this piece. It tends to be either very rich, romantic harmonies, sometimes with the most ravishing melodic lines, as it were, played above these very elaborate harmonies, or else there's kind of exuberant, chatty chanting with lots of very, very clear-cut rhythms and very, very precise articulation of the text. So there are elements of chant in this piece. There's an element of the Gregorian chant. There's also quite a lot of major seventh chords. So where you take an ordinary major triad and add the major seventh. And you also have use of rich, it's very expressive, and it changes a great deal according to the text and according to the mood of the movement, or sometimes the movement of the bar. It is tonal music, but he has a different approach to tonality from the conventional one. Instead of starting in a key and then modulating to another and modulating back again or whatever, he tends to jump. He literally will jump from one key to another. So you might have a phrase that's in one key and then he'll just repeat it in another key without any kind of link, without any sort of modulation in between. And it's also worth saying that when he is writing for orchestra, then the sky's the limit. I mean, the sheer magnificence of the orchestral sound that Poulenc gets in this piece. It's a large orchestra, triple woodwind, big brass section, harps. It's all very, very rich. It's incredibly rich and incredibly precise for the textures that he wants to achieve. Some of it is quite tricky. There's quite a lot of tricky brass writing. For instance, trombones get quite a workout in this piece, but it's all good fun. That's the amazing thing. And it starts with this quite solemn fanfare. And then it repeats. And so on. And then after a very gentle little 2-bar phrase, as you know, the basses enter, chanting. Very declamatory, very homophonic, everybody just singing the words very, 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 very clearly. And the strings are playing. Semiquavers, semiquaver figures, and the bass instruments. Almost like a walking figure. And although there's lots of subtlety, lots of very big dynamic contrasts, the general feel to this opening movement is very matter of fact. It's very precise, very confident, and very exuberant. And the second movement, the Laudamus Te, is even more so. Here, everything becomes offbeat. And then the chorus come in, Laudamus Te, Laudamus Te, Benedicimus Te, Benedicimus Te, and so on. All the orchestra playing off beats, and only really the singers, the chorus on the beat. Again, very much chanting, often in octaves, and really very, very, very precise. This has a slightly strange moment in the middle. Gratias agimus tibi. Everything stops, and the altos just have this. Gratias agimus tibi, and then the strings have these really luscious chords. Before it goes back to the style of the opening of this movement, Propter Magnam Gloriam, as you know very well, those of you who sung this piece. Then the third movement. Now, this is where things become really exquisite. This is where the soprano solo comes into her. After this very gentle introduction, Domine Deus. Pater Omnipotens, soprano solo. Absolutely sublime writing. Very simple chords, lots of sevenths. But very much tonal harmony. And this movement is really one of the trickiest for the chorus because they have a lot of quite difficult chords to pitch. Lots of tritones here, and you will be aware, those of you who've sung it, just how difficult some of those are, and a very tricky ending for the basses, you'll remember. Movement 4, the Domine Filii Unigenite, back to the exuberance. And the chorus again, chanting, Domine Filii Unigenite, Domine Filii Unigenite. It's very short, it's very rapid, it's all pure fun, real exuberant stuff. And that leads into the real center of this piece, the Domine Deus, Agnus Dei. Again, featuring the soprano solo, but the chorus as well. And it has this amazing figure. All these chords based on a minor triad with a major seventh added. And then, just for good measure, he adds a tritone as well. So instead of just playing the F natural in that B flat minor chord, you have that rocking feel with the E natural, the tritone. So the combination of the two almost become a Poulenc trait. That same idea comes in the clarinet sonata and the flute sonata as well. It really made a mark, and you can always recognize Poulenc's music from that idea. The middle of this movement has the most exquisite version. And this movement ends wonderfully subtly with these series of chords shared between the strings and the woodwind, like a whole series of rather chromatic cadences. Culminating in this famous E flat minor. And that immediately gets transferred to the choruses, singing Qui sedes ad dexteram patris, moving from that minor chord too. Qui sedes ad dexteram patris miserere nobis, and he reintroduces the fanfare from the top. Again, feel of chant. And just to add a little spice here, he adds adds a major chord and a minor triad sounding together for the Miserere Nobis. And that leads into the finale, as it were. Qui sedes ad dexteram Patris Miserere Nobis, and so on, which has the kind of jollity of the opening and the same feel of declaiming the text. This is interrupted by the soprano soloist singing the Amen, unaccompanied. And the chorus come in the minor key. And then we have this wonderfully exquisite finish to the piece. And here, rather than using the minor chords with the added seventh, now it's major. So we have a major chord, in this case a G major triad, using the major seventh on the top. And here we go into a major ninth. So you've still got the seventh, but this time it's a minor seventh, and he adds the ninth above it. And then a minor seventh. Again, adding the ninth. Reintroducing the tritone in that last chord. Although it's a dominant seventh, he puts in the, just to add to the richness of the harmony. And this wonderful finish, this climax to this piece, very gentle, but very, very beautiful. And the last version, this is the chorus. C major. And so on. He loves this so much, and so do we all. There's lots of it. And even the very end of the piece, after the back to the fanfare. And the soprano soloist finishes off. And the chorus come back in with that major seventh chord, the F sharp. Very simple use of a very obvious kind of harmonic device, but so beautifully executed, and with all the richness of the textures, the wonderful orchestration, having the soaring soprano over the top. It really is an exquisite work, and definitely one of my favorites. I know many of you know it well, many of you have sung it many times, but I think the important thing to take away from this is that Poulenc, for all his troubles and for all his rather strange divergence in terms of his personality, at one point he could be almost a religious monk, and at other times almost an urchin in terms of his changes in his personality. But it's that contrast between these two elements that produced such a major piece as this, and what makes it, for me, so special. So I hope you agree with that. Lovely to see you all. Not that I can, but I know you're there. Great to see Lindsay has just put put a message on. Thank you for that, Sarah. To Sarah Carruthers, I hope you're okay. And I shall look forward to speaking to you yet again next week. All the very best. Bye-bye.